US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has met with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi in Kuala Lumpur at the ASEAN summit. Global tensions over trade have continued, though President Trump has spoken positively in recent days on US-China relations. Meanwhile, other foreign ministers from ASEAN countries continue to discuss global tensions, including tariffs. Trump's August 1st deadline for reciprocal rates rises has led to concern over economic instability. Kyiv says that another Russian drone bombardment has targeted Ukraine, with injuries reported in Kharkiv. This comes after huge overnight attacks in previous days targeting the capital, as the US confirms NATO will provide defensive missile systems to Kyiv. The UN says that at least 798 people have been killed while seeking food at aid sites in Gaza, as Israel continues its offensive against Hamas in the enclave. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says that a truce could be close amid continued ceasefire talks. Lebanese President Joseph Aoun has ruled out a normalization of relations with Israel. Israeli bombardments in the country have been limited since the ceasefire came into effect in November 2024, though relations have remained strained. Turkish President Erdogan has hailed PKK disarmament as an irreversible turning point. Over 40,000 people have been killed in fighting between the PKK and Turkish personnel in a 47-year conflict. South Korea, Japan and the United States have held a joint air drill over international waters, aiming to deter North Korea's nuclear threats, that according to reports. The three nations' defence chiefs have also met in Seoul, stressing trilateral cooperation. And US singer Chris Brown has pleaded not guilty to 2 further assault charges relating to an alleged bottle attack at a nightclub in London. The 36-year-old is accused of causing actual bodily harm in what prosecutors have called an unprovoked attack. We start this hour at the ASEAN summit, and US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has wrapped up his trip to Kuala Lumpur after attending several meetings. He also held high-level talks with China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi. According to Chinese state media, both sides described the meeting as positive, practical and constructive. Wang Yi said he hopes the US will formulate its China policy based on peaceful coexistence and objectivity. Rubio echoed the optimism, saying President Trump and President Xi have a strong relationship. He stressed that while differences remain, including on Taiwan, there is a mutual need for engagement, and this meeting could help build momentum for future cooperation. This is what the US Secretary of State has said regarding this high-level meeting.
I think there's some areas of potential cooperation. I thought it was a very constructive, positive meeting and a lot of work to do. He's absolutely right that the president has a very good relationship with President Xi. It tracks back to his first term. And, obviously there are some issues we're going to have to work through, and that's to be expected with countries of our size and scope and influence in the world, two global powers such as the United States and China. But I thought it was a very constructive and positive meeting. And the reason why I tell you there's a high probability they're going to meet is that they both want to meet. And I don't know President Xi, but I know President Trump, and I can tell you that he's committed to having that meeting happen. So the reason why I think there's high odds of it happening is they both want it to happen. So I'm sure we'll work on a date and find a mutually acceptable date for both sides. And I'm pretty confident. We want it to be a good meeting, and we're going to work hard between now and whatever date that is to make sure that when that visit does happen.
Well, joining us to discuss these latest developments in a relationship between two of the world's top economies is Ross Feingold, a political analyst who is joining us from Taipei. Ross, as always, thank you ever so much for joining us today. Positive rhetoric there from Marco Rubio after a conversation, but he clearly pointed out that there are still gaps. We know situations like the current tensions with Taiwan is a key different point from both nations in their ideologies as well. Do you think this optimism that Rubio and Trump have both spoken about is rhetoric, or is there a real shift here in potential bilateral relations?
First of all, I have to say I want to watch that clip a few more times because that's certainly not the Senator Rubio who was such a critic about China over a large number of issues, from human rights to religious freedom to Hong Kong, Xinjiang, Tibet, and Taiwan. But obviously, it's different when you're the Secretary of State and you have to look at the relationship through a very different lens. And we see that with Rubio's meeting. And he used the words like cooperation and constructive. It sounded almost like the Biden administration talking about meetings with China. But he, as he also indicated, it's what the boss wants. President Trump likes to say he has a good relationship with President Xi. In the last few months since he took office, President Trump has said on numerous occasions that he wants to meet with President Xi and that it's happening soon. So Rubio has to work towards that goal. And I think when we see or hear the President of the United States or Xi Jinping say that they want to meet, I think that's sincere. I think they do want to meet. I think they realize that they're not going to solve every problem in the relationship when they do meet. But I think it's a genuine desire. And let's also look at the history that every year the President of the United States and the President of China, they do normally meet once, or they have multiple video and or video calls. So there's a high likelihood that they will meet soon.
Yes, also joining us to discuss this potential developing relationship between the US and China is Dr. Noor Nawandi, a security analyst and PSYOPs expert who's joining us from Malaysia. Thank you, Dr. Nawandi, for being here with us. Of course, US-China relations, just some of the discussions that are ongoing in Kuala Lumpur for this ASEAN foreign ministers meeting. But I want to focus on that relationship just a little while longer, specifically looking at trade. We saw reciprocal tariffs that extended and continued to be exaggerated to the point where there were triple-digit rates on both China and the US reciprocally. How important for global stability and global economics is it that these top two economies in the world are aligned and together and not fighting in a bitter trade war?
I think it's important for us to recognize the reciprocal effect of the ongoing tariff war between US and China. We also developed some elements of extending effect to other countries, particularly on the ASEAN countries and as well. So this has to be looked into both elements of internalizations of the products that are having there in China and US, also on the elements that what happens in the context of ASEAN element. So if we particularly looks into the ASEAN, we are basically say the ASEANs are quite trapped in the context of the war. That's why ASEAN also have to move in the blocks of economic diplomacy. And Malaysia, for sure, for example, we move into the neutrality zone, that basically we are having lots of other potential to trade on and to look into how the effect of the tariff war and how to cushion the effect of tariff war between China and US. And significantly, we're also looking into some elements of comprehensive and trans-Pacific agreements, CP, TPP, and also looking into other form of ASEAN's, Australia, UK cooperation to look into how this extended effect can be cushioned by ASEAN as a bloc. Nevertheless, this is something that really have to be in a watchful elements of economic progressions. And I do believe we have some significant emerging effect if this kind of war trade continues to become one of the fatal points of economics in these decades.
Yes, and Dr. Nawandi, staying with you, of course, global conflict is across continents at the moment, and the US are either directly involved or providing support, at least in rhetoric, on many conflicts that are ongoing. The Taiwan situation with China, of course, a pressing point. But looking at a US-China relationship, looking at wider conflicts, do you think that there could be alignment on views with that? We know, of course, the Russia-Ukraine conflict has drawn a line between certain nations, China potentially falling on the other side of the line compared to the United States. How do you think this relationship could develop looking at global conflict and looking at global security in the face of uncertainty?
Basically, if we look into the global order, basically repetitions of many of that will be a second Cold War happening between China and US, although there is also some argument has been studied in some academic research and progressions reports to look into whether there become a form of second Cold War between China and US. And this will be into amounts, because if we look into the Cold War appreciations value and depreciation value, it happens at the peaks where diplomacy become a larger traits of public diplomacy of US against the Soviets, against Russia, and of course, Soviets against the US. And this also being extended to, but in the context of this new conflict, we have looked into a new form of tariff war, which will never happens between the conflicts of the last Cold War between the US and the Soviets. So this is something a little bit more interesting and significant. Interesting, not in the sense it's good, but it's something that we have to be looked carefully, because the extended elements of economic, we decide the power blocks of economics in the next decades and how it will be overlaps into some other representation, such as military, such as the conflicts in Taiwan, the Ukraine, and how it will look into affected into some other elements of neutrality zone. And ASEAN, again, particularly, we are looking into on how this kind of conflict must not be able to distort any form of ASEAN progression, as what we have in Zohan in 1971, where we have a zone of peace and neutrality when ASEAN signed this Zohan, and this Zohan have made sure that ASEAN extended to make sure that the conflicts during the Cold War does not have a significant effect between these two superpowers during that particular time, namely US or Soviet towards the ASEAN continent, as what happened in the Vietnam War. So we might be seeing to there be another form of pact. Some agreements have to sign by some regional values, some blocks, particularly in the ASEAN, to ensure that if this extended conflicts of war tariff has started to enlarge into some divisional elements of other conflicts, some other regional will maintain that stability with some other form of elements of such as what we have the trade agreements between ASEAN, UK, Australia, and some other form of agreement that will stabilize the region for pushing the effect of the US and the China tariff war, and whether it's going to be extended to another form of conflict, we have to really wait and see. But this is something that we have to be careful in looking into what are the socio-economic devaluation that happen if this conflict extended.
Yes, before we move away from China-US relations, Ross, just to finish, my final question with you. You, of course, are joining us from Taipei. Positive rhetoric coming from this meeting from Marco Rubio, positive comments coming from Donald Trump around President Xi. Do you think that the Taiwan tensions have a risk of derailing this positive momentum between China and the US?
Well, the tensions over Taiwan are an important factor in US-China relations, and it never goes away. It goes up and down. For example, when then House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan in August of 2022, tensions spiked, especially because China responded with very large-scale military exercises. You could be assured that the Trump administration is going to approve very large weapon sales to Taiwan sometime in the coming months or years, and that's also going to cause tensions to increase. So these tensions will not go away. They will come back despite periodic nice things that President Trump might say about Xi Jinping, or that Wang Yi, the foreign minister of China, might say about working with the US.
Yes, Ross, you will be staying with us. I want to thank Dr. Noor Nawandi for joining us and discussing those relations. We are going to stay in Malaysia and at the ASEAN summit in Kuala Lumpur. Diplomats from Southeast Asian nations held talks with senior officials from the EU and the UK, focusing on trade and regional security. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio defended President Trump's tariff strategy, stating that unbalanced trade relationships needed to be corrected. Rubio confirmed that a new baseline policy would take effect on August the 1st, but left room for adjustments if deals are reached. He added that the US was warmly received and that talks have been positive overall. On being questioned if the recent tariffs would sour the relation with other nations, this is how Rubio reacted.
I don't agree with that assessment. I mean, look, at the end of the day, the United States has built these tremendous trade imbalances over the last 30 or 40 years. It's unfair to American and American workers, and American, in addition to threaten our industrial capacity. Trade needed to be revisited. The president campaigned on that, and that's what he's doing, and he's resetting it on a global scale. At the end of the day, look, I think countries are going to trade with multiple countries. We don't view this as an opening for anyone. We don't view it that way. We view it as an opportunity to reset global trade in a way that's fair for Americans after 2 or 3 decades of unfairness. If you look at some of these trade deficits, they're...
Well, thank you to Ross for staying with us. Of course, tariffs, a huge topic globally at the moment after Trump's tariff action, not just the Liberation Day on the 2nd of April, but also then further announcement and change to rates with that new deadline of August the 1st. Ross, for Marco Rubio, he knew he was walking into the lion's den at this ASEAN summit. So many nations that are present, of course, looking to arrange deals, discontent over the way that the Trump administration has handled tariffs and the economic impact that it's had. Do you think Marco Rubio has dealt with this well? And do you think we could see actual progress in deals off the back of this ASEAN summit, or is there a potential this is just further rhetoric?
The challenge for Secretary of State Rubio is he's not the tariff guy. He's not the guy heading up the trade negotiations. That's the purview of Secretary of Commerce Lutnick, Secretary of the Treasury Besson, and U.S. Trade Representative Greer. So he's in a bit of a difficult position. Obviously, those countries in ASEAN who received letters earlier this week, they're not happy, and some of them are a bit surprised at the rate that was indicated by President Trump in those letters. And I'm sure they made that very clear to Rubio. And they probably also hinted that if the U.S. doesn't want to deal with us fairly, we'll make more deals with China, because China is an important trading partner for us. It's also a country that provides a lot of inbound investment, especially in infrastructure. So I'm sure Rubio heard all of that, and he's going to bring that message back to Washington, D.C., and to his cabinet colleagues who are heading up the trade negotiations. But certainly, he probably had some uncomfortable conversations.
Yes, Ross, of course, the situation around tariffs has been strained, and this deadline, August the 1st, announced by Scott Bessent, ratified by the Trump administration. But the door has been left open for amendments. We've seen Donald Trump use tariffs, in his words, as a negotiating tool to get people to come to the table and deal with this imbalance that the US say exists in global trade. Do you think that this will be a situation that we have revolving and moving forward, with discussions underway with potentially over a dozen countries at the moment? Could this be kicked down the dirt and keep rolling on for months to come, continuing that potential instability to global economics?
We know that Trump, as part of his negotiations over tariffs, he's very prone to changing his mind, lowering and then raising a proposed tariff rate. That's happened with Canada. It's happened with the European Union, and it's certainly very possible that it'll happen with trading partners here in the Asia-Pacific region. There is a different calculation, though, when it comes to Asia. And again, I think Secretary of State Rubio is going to bring this message back to Washington, D.C., and to his cabinet partners and to the president. And he's going to say, look, we need these countries on our side. We need to make sure that they're not taking China's side in any relevant disputes. And we want to make sure that we reach a good deal with them. Now, President Trump is very focused, though, on trade surplus. And he's going to look at which of these countries have a trade surplus with the United States, and the United States has a trade deficit. And his intuition, President Trump's intuition, is to swing far and impose a higher tariff. So there's probably some very heated discussions internally within the Trump administration, and I expect Secretary of State Rubio to be part of those discussions, even though he's not the decision maker when it comes to tariffs.
Yes, and finally, Ross, just to bring an end to this discussion on trade, where does this go next, in your opinion? And do you think we will see tariffs of 30, 40, 50% on nations? Or do you think that we are seeing a general shift now towards getting a deal done and the focus being on trying to fix that imbalance from the US perspective? And then just to touch on that, what could the impacts be?
It seems that the trend is for smaller trading partners or countries, I should say, that don't have a strong political relationship with the United States at the moment. They might very well be facing 40% tariffs. So here in the Asia-Pacific region, countries like Laos, which is very close to China, Myanmar, which because of the military coup doesn't really have much of a political relationship with the United States. It, again, like Laos, it has a very close relationship to China. The Trump administration might say, you know what, it doesn't matter. Small trade volume, they're too close to China, we'll hit them with 40%. But when it comes to countries like Malaysia, where this foreign ministers meeting took place this week, that's a very strategic country. There's a lot of competition between the United States and China for influence. And the same would apply with some other countries in this part of the world, like Vietnam, for example, like the Philippines. So the U.S. does have strategic reasons to make good deals with these countries and encourage them not to take China's side or to be more pro-U.S. than pro-China. And again, that's going to be Secretary of State Rubio's message that he's taking back to the other members of the cabinet who are dealing with tariff issues.
Yes, absolutely, Ross. Of course, global trade tensions have heightened amidst Trump's tariff action, but discussion ongoing between different countries, those with China, but also with other trading partners. We, of course, here on NewsX World will continue to bring you all of those updates as deals with nations like the EU, South Korea, Japan, and ASEAN nations continue to take place. Moving on now, and the Kremlin's Dmitry Peskov has said that Russia is awaiting the major statement that US President Donald Trump announced he would deliver on Monday. While Trump did not elaborate upon what it will be about in recent days, Trump has expressed frustration with Russian President Vladimir Putin over the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Meanwhile, when asked about the new NATO weapons deliveries to Ukraine, Peskov called it just business, as Kyiv had already been receiving weapons prior to this development. Well, Ross, thank you for staying with us. Russian reaction there to recent announcements that we've heard from North America. Let's first look at NATO weapons in Ukraine. A huge push from Volodymyr Zelensky on aerial support and defensive missiles in the face of persistent Russian attacks. How significant will this be for Kyiv?
The interesting thing here is President Trump ordered a resumption of weapons deliveries after the pause was announced last week. There's certainly some confusion about the internal deliberation process, but here's what might be the really interesting thing to watch out for. There's a lot of people, I think, who are assuming that the U.S. is going to resume providing weapons free of charge to Ukraine. But what appears in the last day is that the United States is saying weapons that NATO members buy from the U.S., they could transfer those to Ukraine and then come back and buy some more. So what really remains to be seen, and I think it's still an unknown, is what is the interest or the desire of the Trump administration to provide weapons free of charge to Ukraine, and as opposed to what is the requirement of the Trump administration that they see a money flow come in from NATO partners for providing weapons to Ukraine. I think that's still something that's playing out at the moment.
Yes, and Dmitry Peskov saying that Trump's set to make this big statement on Monday. Of course, talk around ceasefires is something that we've had in recent months, but also looking at potential sanctions on Russia and third-party sanctions of up to 500% tariffs on countries that are purchasing Russian oil. What do you expect personally Trump's announcement to be? Could it be tariffs? Could it be ceasefire? Or could it be something else?
Well, the most likely one is additional sanctions on individuals or companies in Russia. At least as of the moment, there doesn't seem to be any indications of a ceasefire. Zelensky's positions are very, very difficult, I would say, difficult to change. He's made it very clear he doesn't want to agree to Russia occupying Ukrainian land as part of a ceasefire agreement. He probably would want some commitment of additional weapons, maybe even peacekeepers on the ground before he agrees to a ceasefire. So I wouldn't put ceasefire at the top of the list, although it's possible. And Trump might announce that he is formally supporting the 500% sanctions on buyers of Russian energy. He's been reluctant to do that. India is a buyer of Russian energy, and its relationship with the U.S. is increasingly important, and Trump has a good personal relationship with Prime Minister Modi. So Trump has been reluctant to do that. And frankly, even if that bill is to pass the United States Congress, it would probably include a provision that allows the president to waive those 500% tariffs as well. And Trump might very well use that waiver provision. So I guess all we could do is wait and see until Monday.
Yes, absolutely, and we will bring you those updates on Monday as we get them. Ross, stay with us. We're staying on the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and Ukrainian drone and shelling attacks have reportedly killed at least 3 people in Russia, while Russian bombardments on East Ukraine forced the evacuation of a maternity centre in Kharkiv and wounded 9. Meanwhile, Russian air defence systems intercepted 155 Ukrainian drones overnight, that according to local officials, an attack that comes after Russia pounded Ukraine in successive nightly attacks targeting the capital Kyiv. Both Kyiv and Moscow have stepped up their aerial strikes over recent months as the Kremlin rejects calls to halt its 3-year war. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said a medical facility was hit in the overnight attack. Well, Ross, deaths reported in Russia, further strikes in Ukraine on a 3rd night of bombardment that has seen deaths in the capital Kyiv and other regions as well. Is this war, in your opinion, at a boiling point? And does diplomacy really need to prevail now, with deaths not just on the front lines, but also potential civilian deaths being reported from both countries?
Unfortunately, civilian deaths, especially in Ukraine, have been part of this conflict since Russia invaded Ukraine in February of 2022. There was probably a time when President Trump might have been angry at Ukraine for causing civilian deaths in Russia, but given President Trump's recent criticisms of Russia, including directly of President Putin, I don't think President Trump is necessarily going to be angry that a Ukrainian attack within Russia killed civilians. But yeah, you ask about diplomacy and world opinion. One thing that has also been present throughout this conflict is the constant speculation: who could bring the two sides together? Could it be the United States? At times there was discussion about China, there was discussion about Israel, there was discussion about Turkey, where some of the ceasefire talks have been held. There's even been talk about the Pope playing that role, and now there's a new Pope, and there's talk about the new Pope playing that role. But no one up to now has ever been able to play that role, including the United Nations Secretary General. So it's hard to be optimistic that any of these other potential players could bring about a ceasefire, other than President Trump, because the United States can put pressure on Ukraine by withholding weapons, and because President Trump, as he likes to say, he has a good relationship with President Putin.
Yes, let's look towards diplomacy and towards peace. Of course, 2 rounds of direct negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. The first in over 3 years. They were held, of course, in Istanbul. It seems that the action that we're seeing on the battlefield, but also the level of strikes that are taking place, signal that peace couldn't be further away. Do you think that that is suiting both countries? Why would Russia or Ukraine want to continue this war, and why would they want to stop it, with Russia reportedly making gains on the battlefield and on the ground?
Well, the reason why they'd want to stop it is exhaustion. The militaries of both sides are exhausted. The cost in death and injury to military personnel has been tremendous. The cost in civilian deaths has been tremendous within Ukraine, and to a lesser extent in Russia. They might want to continue with those to hold more ground for when and if they actually are ready to have ceasefire talks. And a lot of the speculation is President Putin is reluctant to reach a ceasefire at the moment because there seems to be some momentum, however slow that front line moves. And it does move very slowly, no matter how many men Russia throws into the fight. But there does seem to be some momentum with Russia to capture more land within Ukraine, within the sections of Ukraine that Russia says it wants to annex. So it seems that Putin does have some motivation to continue the fight, because every day that the fight continues, that Russia does take over a little bit more Ukrainian territory.
Yes, absolutely, Ross Feingold. I'd like to thank you ever so much for joining us to discuss both the ASEAN summit and the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict. We move on now, though, and Turkey has welcomed the start of the Kurdistan Workers' Party's disarmament process as a milestone and an irreversible turning point towards lasting peace. In Iraq's Kurdish region, a small group of PKK members destroyed their weapons in a symbolic ceremony, marking the first step of a broader summer-long demilitarization plan. This comes after the PKK announced that it in May, that it would abandon its 4-decade-long armed campaign against the Turkish state, a conflict that has claimed over 40,000 lives. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan praised the move, calling it a break from bloody shackles that have held Turkey back. The group's jailed leader, Abdullah Öcalan, also voiced support in a recorded message describing the moment as a transition from armed struggle to democratic politics. Officials say the disarmament could also improve Turkey's ties with the US and other regional actors. Well, joining us to discuss the significance of this disarmament, of course, at a time where there have been over 40,000 deaths reported and a conflict which is over 40 years long. Adrian Calamel, a terror scholar, joining us from New York on the programme to discuss that. Adrian, Turkey and the PKK, of course, we've detailed some of the latest information there, but for us, could you please provide some context on why this conflict started, how it has evolved, and why now disarmament and improved relations is the move?
Well, great to see you again. Excuse me. Great to see you again, Joshua. This is, as you said, it's a conflict that stretches back, decades now. If we look at the PKK, what they're basically their composition, they're a communist, Marxist, Kurdish organization, political organization, and they check off every box when you talk about when you look at terrorist organizations. So they're a communist or Marxist terrorist organization that's been at war with Turkish state. Now over those 40 years or so. So the Turkish state has gone through multiple transitions, and now we're in this phase of Erdogan, which makes it very interesting because he's consolidated power over the levers of democracy by making certain constitutional changes. PKK, as I say, and you mentioned in the segment, 40,000 deaths reported. It's been a long, bloody ride with atrocities on both sides. So, this can be looked as a welcomed phase, but I think it's also like, what happens next? What happens to the Kurds? Do they lose autonomy? Do we see Erdogan, now that he has them without weaponry, does he use that in some pernicious way? So that's kind of what we're looking at. It's basically a Marxist state that was a Marxist organization that took control of the Kurdish movement in Turkey, and then was used against what was a Western-aligned, NATO-backed country in Turkey.
Yes, and Adrian, how easy will this shift be? How easy will it be for demilitarization, but also then integration of the Kurdish people after such a long-running conflict?
That's another great question. It's going to be long, and then it's going to be difficult, because even with any type of these demilitarization moves that we've seen with, let's say, the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, there's always going to be offshoots that still carry on the cause, that don't agree with the leadership and the decisions that leadership made. So does something spring off and support that Kurdish group, or does the Kurdish group, Kurdish, do they still experience some form of autonomy and also incorporated into the Kurdish state? Those are the questions everybody's really kind of asking, and it's a big, what we really don't know, because the relations between the two have not been good for obvious reasons. And we also look at the moves that have been made to the south in Syria, which was an Ottoman Turkish adventure, I would say. There's been significant moves with the Kurdish population trying to get them to fold into the military there. So, and the YPG and the groups in Syria, the Kurdish groups in Syria, have always been aligned with the much larger PKK organization in Turkey. So it could have ripple effects across the two countries.
Yes, Adrian, you will be staying with us and joining us in a short moment on the programme. We now move, though, to Gaza, and the United Nations has revealed that at least 798 Palestinians have been killed since May the 27th while trying to access food aid in the enclave. According to the UN Human Rights Office, 615 of those deaths occurred near aid sites operated by the US and Israeli-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. An additional 183 people were reportedly killed along humanitarian convoy routes. Let's have a listen to Ravina Shamdasani, who is the spokesperson of the OHCHR.
Up until the 7th of July, we've recorded now 798 killings, including 615 in the vicinity of the GHF sites and 183 presumably on the routes of aid convoys. This is nearly 800 people who have been killed while trying to access aid.
Well, the GHF, which began operations in late May, relies on private US security and logistic firms to bypass the traditional UN-led aid system, which Israel claims allowed groups to divert supplies. However, the UN and major aid agencies have condemned the GHF model, calling it dangerous and a violation of humanitarian neutrality. Eyewitnesses and rights groups say Israeli forces have repeatedly opened fire on civilians crowding near GHF sites, while Israel has accused Hamas of staging attacks and inflating casualty numbers. It has admitted that Israeli troops killed several civilians and promised revised protocols in response. Despite GHF denials of any wrongdoing at their sites, the rising death toll reported has sparked global outrage and renewed calls for safe, impartial and internationally coordinated aid delivery in Gaza. Let's once again listen in to Ravina Shamdasani.
Overall, in the course of this conflict, we have had serious concerns about respect for international humanitarian law principles, essential principles of distinction, proportionality in attack. We have seen that of the overall death toll in Gaza, a large proportion are women and children. And again, that raises serious questions about whether these principles are being respected. We've raised concerns about atrocity crimes having been committed and the risk of further atrocity crimes being committed. Where people are lining up for essential supplies such as food and medicine, and where they are being attacked, where again, as my colleagues have said, they have a choice between being shot or being fed. This is unacceptable and it's continuing.
Well, joining us to discuss these latest updates and UN statements is Ali M. Abushbak, a Middle East affairs researcher who is joining us from Cairo. Ali, of course, concern voiced here by the UN over nearly 800 people who have died in and around these aid sites. There have been accusations, of course, from human rights groups about this occurring, but certain denial from groups. Of course, Israel have acknowledged some killings and say that protocols will be looked at. But how important is it that aid sites are managed effectively in a country and a region which many experts say is facing a humanitarian crisis with risk of famine and other issues? Well, it seems that Ali is not yet
thank you,
with
Joshua, for having me. I think, let me mention that.
Hello, Ali. Sorry, I think we lost you for a moment there, but please carry on.
Yeah, Joshua, it's worth mentioning that about the humanitarian aid and obtain the humanitarian aid, it's described on the ground among the Palestinians as a squad game, whereas that it's a game of death where the Palestinian is gathering to get killed or injured to obtain the humanitarian aid. In fact, the report of United Nations is, I guess, it's a crucial at this moment, and it's highlighting the human rights violation from the Israel and GHF. At the time, the Palestinians are suffering from the famine and the starvation. So the thing is, I guess this report, it should be pressurize the international community and actor to intervene in this crisis and stop killing the civilians and stop killing the people from Gaza who's seeking for food and essential supplies, especially at that time is Palestinians are suffering from more than, there is a lack of the humanitarian aid, there is a lack of supplies. So the things is initial supplies as well as, so the things is the situation is completely dire in Gaza. And in my opinion, this report, it's highlighting the value of the civilians according to international law. Civilians and unarmed people should be protected in the conflict duration and should be protected from the targeting and deliberately targeting, because Israel's forces and American troops deliberately killing the civilians, and we have witnessed several of footage that civilians have been injured or killed, and they are transferred to the hospital through the animal cart. And there is no ambulance service in Gaza because of the blockaded, and there is no fuel in Gaza to serve the people who got injured or the people who got be stuck under the rubble due to the Israeli airstrike. So, in my opinion, this report is a significant and highlighting the miserable situation in Gaza and the miserable situation of the desperate civilians in Gaza who's seeking for food, who's seeking to survive, and no doubt they are innocent people. They are deeply lambasted Hamas practice on the ground and lambasted Hamas negotiation. They are putting the pressure on Hamas to accept the deal between with Israel to reach out to ceasefire, even a temporary ceasefire for 60 days. The people in Gaza are ready to accept it.
Yes, and Ali, before we move on, I do want to look at claims that if aid is not brought into Gaza in this manner via the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, then it could fall into the hands of Hamas. Reports of aid shipments being apprehended and then either used by Hamas or being sold at inflated prices, which of course is then providing funds to the group amid their fight with Israel. How real is that risk, and how important is it that any ceasefire discussions are brought to a close with a deal being agreed, given the humanitarian situation in the enclave?
Joshua, the allegation about Hamas stealing the humanitarian aid and use it for its benefit, it's a very complicated thing, because I guess there is no evidence about this on the ground. And also Hamas was clear, should be United Nations taking the responsibility on disseminating and deliver the humanitarian aid. And it has a long experience how to deliver the humanitarian aid to the Palestinian civilians since past around more than decades. United Nations took this responsibility, and even that some non-government organization or international organization has experience more than GHF. So the thing is, putting allegation Hamas is stealing it, it's a very complicated. It's not easy to, unfold these things. This is on side. And other side, about the negotiation between Hamas and Israel, there is a conflicting reports about it, while some news list suggested that there is a progress on the negotiation process between Hamas and Israel, and other news list they are confirmed that reaching out to deal between Hamas and Israel, it's a bit difficult, and it's not. There is no any significant there is no any significant progress in this case. This is worth mentioning that there is an indirect negotiation between Hamas and Israel. It's holding in Qatar up to now, and Donald Trump yesterday he confirmed that within next week or the next at the end of this week, maybe we'll hear a good news Also, before when he met Benjamin Netanyahu in the White House, he confirmed that last Thursday it was he has a optimist about reaching to the ceasefire between Hamas and Israel. But up to now, I guess there is no progress between Hamas and Israel in the negotiations. Especially Hamas has some red lines and Israel has some red lines, which there is a huge gap between Hamas and Israel. I guess Hamas is not going to accept to unarmed and disarmed its group, and it's not going to leave the power in Gaza. Same time, and at the same time, Israel stressed at that point Hamas should be leave Gaza and should be disarmed and should be completely give up
Yes,
from Gaza.
Ali, I'm sorry to interject, but we are unfortunately running shorter on time. You will be staying with us, however, as we move away from Gaza now into Lebanon. Of course, tensions between Lebanon and Israel have been heightened after conflicts between Israel and Hezbollah. But the Lebanese president, Joseph Aoun, has ruled out normalization with Israel despite recent overtures from Israeli officials. Speaking to an Arab think tank delegation on Friday, Aoun stressed that peace or the presence of war is Lebanon's current priority, but said normalization is not on the table. The remarks come after Israel's foreign minister expressed interest in opening diplomatic ties with both Lebanon and Syria. Aoun reiterated Lebanon's demand that Israel withdraw from the remaining border points that it occupies. This according to a ceasefire deal that ended the last war with Hezbollah. He also defended Lebanon's right to hold a monopoly over armed forces, hinting at a non-military approach to eventual Hezbollah disarmament. The United States has been pushing for Hezbollah's full disarmament, while Beirut has sent an official response that remains confidential for now. Well, I would like to welcome back Adrian Calamel. Thank you for sticking around while we discussed Gaza there. Moving now to Lebanon. Of course, relations between Israel and the country have been strained. We had strikes coming from Israel within Lebanon territory. They, of course, the Israeli army and the IDF saying they were targeting Hezbollah operatives backed by Iran. What's the significance of these tensions between Israel and Lebanon, and how could that play out, given there has been a fragile ceasefire, but of course still a boiling point?
Yeah, another great question. Great to be back. With Lebanon, it comes back to Hezbollah is still not holding up to its UN resolutions, especially 1701, where they're supposed to withdraw from south of the Litani River. And I never expected them to do that. They spent significant amount of money invested in that area and building up southern Lebanon with a tunnel system, command and control centers that were critical, that we saw really in action from October 8th until as you stated, the fragile ceasefire. They were effective during the 33-day war that happened in, I think it was 2006, Lebanon. So Israel's going to continue to operate there, and because they also see the Lebanese state, it doesn't have the ability to stand up to Hezbollah, and that still remains to be seen. Whether the Lebanese armed forces, the Lebanese forces, the UNIFIL forces, whether they can disarm Hezbollah, and I just don't see that happening. Especially when they've kind of had, this is a group that's really been molded after the IRGC and are very effective at what they do compared to a state that has been completely fragmented for well over 4 decades at least. So it's tough for a state to try and take back that control from Hezbollah, which has just grown into this beast. From roughly 1982 until really October 7th, October 8th, 2023, they were the greatest threat to Israel, and now they've been completely defanged. So, well, not completely defanged, but that's what Israel's trying to do, is limit their capacity, and then hopefully the Lebanese state, and this is hopefully, can reassert control over Hezbollah's monopoly on violence, because that's how they have essentially kept people in line in Lebanon.
Yes, absolutely. Adrian, thank you very much for that update. You will be staying with us, of course, here on NewsX World. We will bring you all of those updates on tensions in the Middle East. But we now move to China-EU relations, and the European Parliament has sharply criticised China's recent export restrictions on rare earth minerals, accusing Beijing of leveraging its dominance over these critical resources to exert geopolitical pressure. The motion, which passed with 523 votes in favour to 75 votes against and 14 abstaining, demands China lift the restrictions, describing them as unjustified and coercive. China controls around 60% of global rare earth mining and produces 90% of the rare earth magnets used in technologies such as electric vehicles, wind turbines and military systems. In April, Beijing imposed new export licensing requirements, citing national security concerns, especially over the military applications of rare earths. In response, the Parliament has called on the European Union to boost its own rare earth mining and processing capabilities. This includes allocating specified budgets for domestic critical mineral projects and establishing strategic stockpiles to reduce dependence on China by 2030. This resolution comes ahead of a key EU-China summit where rare earths are expected to be a major topic. The outcome of these discussions could have lasting effects on global trade dynamics. Well, we'll head back to the Middle East now, but this time looking at Iran. Iranian activists Narges Mohammadi, who won the 2023 Nobel Peace Prize for her fight for women's and human rights in Iran, has reportedly received death threats from Tehran as per the Nobel Committee. Committee's chairman, Jorgen Wagner-Friedness, has said that he received an urgent call from Mohammadi where she mentioned about her life threats. As per Watney, Mohammadi said on call that she has been indirectly and directly threatened with physical elimination by agents of the regime if she does not stop advocating for democracy and human rights. The committee has said that the threats were explicitly aimed at forcing the jailed activists to withdraw from all forms of public engagement within Iran and cease international advocacy or media appearances related to democracy, human rights and freedom of expression. The committee has now called on Iranian authorities to ensure the safety of Mohammadi and others facing similar threats. Well, Adrian Calamel, thank you for once again staying with us. What's the significance of threats like these, and what's the impact on campaigning and people that are standing up for what they believe in the face of potential oppression?
Well, this is a very complicated situation here because, yes, people have been assassinated in the streets of London, in the streets of Paris, in the streets of Vienna, in the streets of Geneva by the Islamic Republic. People have been kidnapped and taken back and put into prison. People have and then died in those prisons, like Jimmy Sharmad is a prime example, and then his body shipped back to West Germany. Just horrific incidents. So these should all be taken seriously. But I want to give everybody a little bit of caution about the Islamic Republic's playbook. I mean, what they do with an individual like Narges Mohammadi. She is really what you would call part of what the Islamic Republic uses as a kind of a faux opposition. And she's won the Nobel laureate now, Nobel Peace Prize. She's being floated. I've heard one congressional member talk about her as the logical replacement for the Islamic Republic. But we need to look at her time in Evin prison and what she's been jailed for, and her time in the video that surfaced when she was in Evin prison. She wasn't a prisoner. She was basically under house arrest. She is a tool that the opposition uses to drum up to say that there is an opposition movement, but she really has not much of a following outside of her very inner circle. And most of the Iranian diaspora, if you were to ask them about Mohammadi, would say that she doesn't represent the Iranian people. She's actually works part and parcel with the regime in one of their strategies to keep the West off balance.
Adrian Calamel, I would like to thank you ever so much for joining us and discussing all of those topics there. We will, of course, continue to monitor everything from the Middle East and bring you all of those updates here on NewsX World. But now it's time to bring you the latest from across the world of business. In a sign of growing economic strain, China's Hunan province now allows government officials to take on side jobs like driving, writing or coaching to offset shrinking incomes. The move follows nationwide cuts to bonuses and salaries as local budgets feel the impact of China's post-zero COVID slowdown and a slump in land sales. Officials must avoid conflicts of interest and can't use public resources, according to state media. The once secure iron rice bowl jobs are no longer immune to the country's potential economic pressures. Bitcoin has surged to a record $116,781.1 on Friday, driven by strong institutional demand and supportive policies from US President Donald Trump. The world's biggest cryptocurrency has jumped over 24% this year, boosted by Trump's executive order creating a strategic crypto reserve and the appointment of crypto-friendly officials like Secretary Chair Paul Atkins. Experts say large investors are soaking up Bitcoin's supply, pushing exchange liquidity to record lows. The Trump administration's open embrace of digital assets is fueling confidence and momentum in the market. Ford has reached a deal with German union IG Metall to safeguard jobs at its Cologne site until 2032. The agreement relies primarily on voluntary redundancies, with generous severance packages far above industry standards, that according to the company's work council. While the long-term future of production in Cologne remains unclear, the union praised the job security framework as a crucial step. Employees will be briefed on the details during internal meetings held throughout Friday. Korean Air reported a 4% drop in cargo revenue for the second quarter, citing volatility from US tariff policies. The airline, a major player in Asian cargo transport, said recent US moves, including the removal of a tax exemption on low-value Chinese packages, hit e-commerce shipments hard. To cope, Korean Air said it diversified into high-yield cargo like semiconductors, batteries and perishables. Overall revenue remained flat at 4 trillion won, which equates to around $2.9 billion, but operating profit fell 3.5% due to these rising costs. Nissan Motor is reportedly in talks to supply vehicles to Honda Motor in the United States, that according to reports. The discussions include potentially using Nissan's underutilized Mississippi plant to manufacture large pickup trucks for Honda. If finalized, the move would mark a rare collaboration between two major Japanese automakers in the competitive US market. Neither company has confirmed the report. Well, that is all we have time for, but we will continue to bring you more of the latest breaking news from across the world. Thank you.